Right, so good evening everyone, thank you for coming. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of Warwick Politics Society to the official hustings for Warwick and Leamington for the 2019 general election. I would like you to take this opportunity to quiz these potential candidates who are going to be your potential future MP on local and national issues, so go for it. But we do have to say, we don't be as loud, talk as much as you want, quiz to your heart's content, but heckling won't be tolerated throughout this evening and appropriate measures will be taken if necessary, but we don't want that to happen. We want this to be an enjoyable evening for you all. So I'm going to hand over to our chair for the evening, Bryony Jenner, and I hope you have an enjoyable evening.
Good evening everyone, my name is Bryony Jenner and I'll be hosting tonight's hustings. For the majority of the hustings, please only ask open questions, so nothing party or candidate centred. There will be an option for sort of more centred or more targeted questions towards the end of the hustings, and please keep your questions short. If you're unhappy asking questions in the audience, please tweet at Warwick Pulsar with the hashtag #PulsarHustings, and Johnny over here will ask the question on your behalf. Answers given by candidates will be limited to a minute, just to let you know. And we do have two other candidates standing in this constituency, both of which I've got statements for, so I'll just read those to you now before we get started. So standing for the SDP, we have Sandra Bennett, who has given the following statement. Apologies for my not attending this hustings, but I'm unable to for long-term medical reasons. I stand for my party in this election because I want to provide the option for people in this constituency to vote for a centrist party who would vote through the current Brexit withdrawal agreement and who would change our current outdated voting system of first past the post to proportional representation. Our policies on climate change, ensuring the future of the NHS and more can be found on our website. So that was Sandra Bennett from the SDP. The other candidate not able to be here tonight is Bob Dylan, who's standing as an independent candidate, who's given the following statement. I've worked for over 30 years to leave the EU. I'm sure you will go over the arguments laid out over the last 3 years. If I had to recommend an option to a board of directors or to the audience, it would be option 4. What is that, you may ask? Option 1 is the Conservative Boris deal. It is worse than the deal to remain, on course to pay double the £39 billion fee. Please read the deal and do the calculations. It will be interesting to see the candidate explain the benefits benchmarked against present reality. Option 2 is the Labour deal. Let's go over the same argument for another year, sitting on the fence. Option 3 is the Lib Dem deal to remain, where we will ignore a democratic vote. Option 4, however, is what I'm offering as an independent. My family, like many, is divided on the issue, and so I've come to the conclusion that if elected, will support people's vote. I will campaign, of course, for a clean break. The NHS is breaking down and parts are for sale, that is a fact. It started in 1997 under Labour with PFI policy, which allowed contractors to charge 12% or more of interest for up to 20 to 30 years. This was made worse by no extra funding from the Conservatives due to austerity. They will argue $3 billion per year, but Jeremy Hunt then requested savings to match investment. We need to create an all-party commission to fix a grey institution, starting with a £6 billion cash injection for the next 5 years, as requested by the NHS Chief Executive. Education, like health, should be free. Burdening the future before they start makes no sense. The main parties will promise you the earth, but will be put off by the payment bill, £100 billion. I believe tuition fees should be abolished, get the £100 billion from the financial banking tax. It is also time to bring back capital punishment for treason and murder and recruit 40,000 new police officers requested by the Police Federation to help deal with the rising crime on streets and terror threats. Once again, this was a statement from Bob Dylan, standing as an independent candidate. Excuse me. So now the candidates, if you will please introduce yourselves and give your opening statements. James?
Well, hello, I'm Tim Griffiths, Brexit Party candidate for Leamington. Who am I? I was born in Leamington, raised in Leamington, then moved to Warwick, lived in Warwick for 40 years. I've been retailing, and worked in a small manufacturing company for a while, and the most recent significant thing I did was I was my dad's carer for 10 years, 5 of which he was bedridden. So I've had quite a varied life. I think that's really it, really.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you, my name's Jack Rankin. I'm a Conservative and Unionist candidate in the election in Warwick and Leamington on the 12th of December. I first came to the area, maybe like most of you, as a student at the University of Warwick, so I graduated in 2013. I did 4 years here, I did physics undergraduate degree. It wasn't too long, the last time I was at a Polsoc event was as the chairman of the University of Warwick Conservative, probably my final year. And I've got to say, when I did those, I wasn't afforded the opportunity of no heckling, so I'm glad none of you are here today. I think you're all politically aware enough for me not to read the spiel from CCHQ, although I hope some of you are playing the drinking game to see how many times I can say get Brexit done today. But I am going to tell you a little bit about what I want to achieve locally. You'll see it on my leaflets as my plan for Warwick and Leamington. I want to deal with violent crime. I think that's something that we've not got a handle on. We've put another 150 officers in Warwickshire Police this year. With Boris's 20,000. Matt tick me off for saying Boris's 20,000 police. Another 150. It's also, we've got a problem in Leamington with hate crime as well, so I hope that those officers can contribute towards that effort.
Sorry, Jack, I'll just ask you to close up, please.
Okay, support local business, fair funding for our schools, and cleaner and greener air in our town centres. Thank you.
Thank you. And Jonathan?
Good evening. Yes, I'm Jonathan Chilvers, and I'm the candidate for the Green Party at this election. I studied history and politics at this University of Warwick more years ago than Jack. And I never quite left, so I still live with my family a stone's throw away from my student house in South Leamington. And that's also the area I now represent as a local councillor. So if any of you live in South Leamington, I may well be your local representative on the county council. And I'm standing because climate change is bigger than Brexit. And it is how we respond over the next 5 years to the climate emergency that will define our future as a country and all of our futures. And so I'll be talking this evening about how we need to completely change urgently our transport systems, our heating and our energy systems, which will hopefully lead to lower bills, and our food production, and a range of other things which we need to tackle the climate emergency, but will also help us to live happier and healthier lives.
Thank you, Jonathan. And Matt?
That's right. Thank you. I hope you can hear me at the back. My name is Matt Weston, and yes, up until a few weeks ago, I was the MP for Warwick and Leamington. I live in the heart of Southtown Leamington. I'm probably your neighbour, or neighbour to several of you. If you have a party, I've probably heard you having a party. I had a very good time. I've lived in the constituency for 15 years with my wife Rebecca, who happens to teach at the university. Before being tempted by politics, I spent 24 years in the automotive industry working for Peugeot. I went to university, went to Bristol, red brick place just down the M5, and I was lucky. I got free tuition. I got a maintenance grant. Life was pretty rosy in those days. That's the sort of stuff that I want to see you benefit from as well. We have the opportunity for once-in-a-generation transformational change. What we'll be pushing for, I'll be pushing for, is a public vote, confirmatory vote, to put a deal back to the people against Remain. I also, secondly, want to see us tackle the climate emergency, and Labour will do that. I want us to invest heavily in education, and I want us to invest in our public services. That was what I grew up with. That was the sort of society I enjoyed, and I want that for the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. And Lewis?
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm Lewis Adam. I'm the Liberal Democrat parliamentary candidate to Warwick and Leamington. I was born in Leamington. I grew up in the area, and I studied at Coventry University. So it's very in the other direction. But no, and it's great to have a Midland base for my education. It's made me who I am. I'm a structural engineer by trade, and this has definitely informed me as a politician and how I go about listening to people and trying to actually reflect what people need and feel they need represented. My priorities are fairly clear. I think we need investment in the NHS, particularly in mental health. I think mental health is something that's been neglected for too long, and that also needs to go out beyond just health services. It needs to be in our businesses, in our education systems. We also need to look at education in more depth. We need to make it a healthier, happier environment to be within, and that's from schools up to vocational training to university, like yourselves are experiencing right now, and beyond, so that people have the skills that they need. And the other thing that I know is touched upon by the other parties, but we have a real drive behind, is fighting the climate emergency. We've got a great history as a party combating this, and this is something we want to go as far as possible on to people's futures and to deliver a fair, balanced society that we can all live in and all enjoy.
Perfect, thank you, Lewis. Now we will do just an opening question, and then it will be open to the audience if you'd like to ask any sort of general questions to all of the candidates. So, for the first question, what is the biggest issue facing Warwick and Leamington in this election, and how will you address this issue once elected? Who would like to begin? Matt, would you like to start us off?
Well, I think the biggest issue for Warwick and Leamington, I mean, it's very easy to be subdued by Brexit, but it is such a critical thing for so many parts of our constituency. Those in education and the threat to the Erasmus programme. This is such an international university and has benefited from a very open access to Europe and to the wider world. But for the automotive industry, which I was in, and so many people work in the constituency, it is actually existential, because we do face a serious threat of a no-deal Brexit or a bad Brexit, such as the Johnson deal, which will damage our automotive sector. So these are, I think, really serious things that we have to address urgently, and that's why we're proposing a confirmatory vote, that we will put forward a deal that we'll negotiate, we'll finalise, because it's actually very close to completion, within 3 months, put it back to the people between 4 to 6 months, and then we will plan to move on. Obviously that will involve further negotiation if we vote to leave as a public. But there are huge issues within our health service, as has been mentioned, about mental health and so on. Housing is a crucial issue. It's great that Jonathan stayed on after university, but you know, housing costs in Warwick and Leamington are prohibitive, so expensive. It's like 9 times average income to get a entry-level property, and it's just unaffordable. So that's why I've been campaigning heavily for social rent and council property. We need to build and make our society affordable.
Okay, and Jack?
So let me reword the question. Is Brexit the biggest issue for Warwick? I think the answer is no, but Brexit is what's getting in the way of everything else. So I think the reason why the public, generally speaking, is so fed up with politics is that Brexit has taken all the oxygen out of our political system. So all these issues, like the NHS, like the climate emergency, like schools, like violent crime, are not being dealt with at the moment because politicians, in people's perception, and I believe in reality, are spending a lot of time effectively arguing amongst themselves at Westminster. And I think not only is that sapping confidence in our democratic system, it's also damaging the country. When we talk to people on the doorsteps in Warwick and Leamington, families and businesses say they're not really remain or leave anymore, but what they're saying is we can't plan for the future. And I think the most beneficial aspect of our policy, get Brexit done, is that it's bringing some kind of finality to the process, which allows us to talk to all these issues which are of concern in Warwick and Leamington. So whether that's the climate emergency, whether it's NHS funding, violent crime, or sorting out fairer funding, politics won't move on until we deal with the Brexit issue.
Thank you, Jack. Would Tim like to speak? And can we keep the question focused on the issues facing Warwick and Leamington in this election?
There's one particular issue that I believe is a big problem for Warwick and Leamington. It's an ergonomic one. We can go on about Brexit and all the other internationalist issues, but you're asking about the problem for Warwick and Leamington. Warwick and Leamington is basically crushed between 3 large pieces of infrastructure: the M40, the A46, and HS2. All towns are told to expand in a specific way by central government in terms of housing and housing development. What happens when you can't expand? That will happen to Leamington. Eventually HS2 will chop off the top end, and we're literally looking at the town stuck between 3 great pieces of infrastructure. And I think that in the long term, that's going to make Leamington a very difficult place to live in, because it's going to affect the traffic. And then you start, the whole thing is a cascade of issues. So these things cannot be just looked at as what is the one thing. Actually, there's a lot of things going on in Leamington. In my opinion, at the moment, we're not looking at the way HS2 is going to affect the way the town will develop. Many years ago, there was a talk of a northern bypass, and of course creating a ring road system. Guess where it would have gone? Exactly where HS2 is. So when you make one decision, you affect another.
Thank you, Tim. And Lewis?
Thank you. I think it's we've got to look at the root causes of the problems that we see as a society. For me, obviously, Brexit is a major.
Parties here and help shape the future candidates and the future people that then become our prime ministers, etc.
I would actually second that. And it doesn't matter what background you're interested in, what party you're interested in, get involved.
Perfect. And Jonathan?
Yeah, thank you. So, why should you trust us? Why should you trust all politicians? I think I'm not somebody that says all politicians are the same. I just don't think that's true. And I think there are a lot of good people that go into politics with the aim to make a positive change, but they get caught by the system and they become beholden to their parties to get to where they got to and think, oh, if I can just get to Parliament, I'll change things when I get there. And then they find that when they're there, that they're stuck in the system. So, especially for the larger parties, for Jack and for Matt, they're beholden to their party because of the money that they need to get elected, because of the way the whipping system works. And so I think if we're going to, and so whatever they think personally, if they vote against their party at Westminster, they might get away with it once, but if it's more than that, it's going to be career-ending. And so it makes it very difficult for people to trust politicians. So how do we solve that? I do think that changing the electoral system would help, but I also think we need devolution down power and money to more local levels, so it's easier for politicians to be held accountable. People aren't stupid. They know that their local council leader doesn't have loads of power. They know that it rests in Parliament. We're one of the most centralised countries in the world, and I think that has to change so that people have a real, genuine link to democratic engagement. They can see democracy works when they contact their local councillor or their local representative.
Thank you, Jonathan. And finally, Matt, what is it that politicians or parties can do to bring trust back to politics?
Well, I would say that there's a lot that can be done. I entered into politics very late, at sort of my early 50s. As I said, my background is in business, corporate business and so on. So I'm not a career politician, so I wouldn't describe myself as a technocrat. I'm very unusual, actually, in Parliament. There are very few people who've got an industrial background, as it happens. And I mean, the point about not trusting, I can well understand that. It's been a very challenging time having Parliament so paralysed, really. But I have to say, I did work very hard, cross-party, behind the scenes, backbench, working with the likes of Oliver Letwin, working with Nick Bowles, Ken Clark and others, to try and arrive at some sort of deal that could be struck. And we were very close to actually resolving Brexit behind the scenes, backbench. But the trusting, I totally get. I mean, the fact is that I found myself amongst an organisation in a setup where Parliament was suspended, as you know, back in September, illegally. We had the government being found in contempt of Parliament. And so that trust, or lack of trust, is pretty self-evident because of the sorts of actions being undertaken by those in the executive. One of the issues is diversity. I'm very proud of the Labour Party and what it's achieved. The number of women that we have, 40% of the total number of MPs are women. And we have a reasonable mix of BME background as well. But I'm afraid to say the current politics is driving a lot of women out of it. And I'm afraid particularly in the Conservative Party and more moderates within that party too. I think it's a real shame, and I would really like to see much greater diversity and more women coming back in.
Mayor?
Yeah, Jack.
From this question, will you?
Yeah, okay. Jack, if you'd like to respond, and then we'll take the next question.
So I think that's right. We need more diversity in Parliament. I think he's right to say the Conservative Party is behind other parties. But one of the reasons we often struggle, and on a general point, I'm not trying to make a massive point, although it is. One of the downsides that we find in getting people to enter into Parliament is effectively the social media monstering that we get. I think it's particularly bad at Conservatives. And we can struggle often to engage. There's small things we should be doing, we can often struggle to engage young centre-like women because they know what the online world, the social media often is. So sometimes I say we've got a lot more to do. You'll recognise that here, but sometimes it's coming from other places.
Okay, thank you, Jack. Johnny, would you like to read out the question from the Twitter account?
James Rolls asks on Twitter, would you give up your seat as an MP if it meant that a woman could get the role?
As with Tim?
The whole point of standing is the individual that stands in front of the public is the person who gets elected. If a woman wants to stand, then she should be standing. And I've been involved because I'm the coordinator, I'm the Coventry and Warwickshire coordinator for the Brexit Party. That's my other hat. I report in the late stage, and I was involved in very direct conversation with the head office, and I helped make sure that one of our female candidates got the seat she wanted. So she wanted a particular seat, she got it. And indeed, it's something about diversity. One of our candidates in Coventry, Idrisu, is Guyana, obviously African-American background, obviously, and ex-British Army, and very proud to be British and fighting for the Brexit Party, fighting for Brexit. Is an African background. So I think the Brexit Party has put a great deal of effort into getting its diversity figures right. One of the things that did happen, though, unfortunately, is we had a tough decision that had to be made, and a lot of the female candidates were standing in seats that got cut. It's the way of the world. It was pure bad luck in that sense.
Tim, we'll have to wrap you up there. Thank you. And Lewis?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's a very important question. Ultimately, if I were elected as the MP, I wouldn't stand down immediately because it was triggering a by-election. That doesn't automatically get a female MP, but I think something the Liberal Democrats have done in the past is look at all-women shortlists to address this problem, and also have alternating systems in terms of like the EU parliamentary elections, so that there's always an alternation in that proportional representation. I think generally I'm not a massive fan of the quota system because I think you've got to make sure you have the fairness and assess people on their qualities. But when there is such inequality already in the system, it's only right that we try and address that head on. And that doesn't just go for men and women, that goes for minority backgrounds, people with disabilities, people from different gender and sexual orientation. These all need addressing, and everybody needs to do better at it.
Perfect. And any of the other candidates to speak to that question, Jonathan?
Yes, so great question. And I don't think it's great that we're standing here five white, middle-aged, middle class and it's something that as a local party in Warwick District that trying to make our party diverse and our local councils more diverse, that we try and take really seriously, especially in the last year or two, and I'm proud to say that we've made some progress in that, but I'm not saying it's easy. You have to be really intentional about it. And so I think it'd be fantastic if next time there's a general election, which it's kind of hoping might be 4 or 5 weeks away, that the Green Party is represented by a fantastic female candidate that we can bring through over the coming months or years. That would be my wish. So to answer the question directly, I wouldn't stand down straight away, but certainly next time I would want to see a female candidate.
Thank you.
Question of the audience.
Yes, that's fine.
I mean, ladies, why won't you stand? The ladies in the audience.
Sorry, everyone, can you direct back to the questions, please? Matt, thank you.
Thank you. It's a very good question, and I don't plan to put it like that. But I ultimately, when I do stand down, I would like to be replaced by a woman. When I stood down as a county councillor, whatever it was, a year and a half ago, we put in place an all-women shortlist. So we don't think about all-women shortlists, we actually do all-women shortlists, and that's what's happened in parts of Coventry, which I'm very proud of. So it's an important thing to do, and we have succeeded through having all women shortlists. And the person who replaced me at the county council is excellent. I mean, she's doing a terrific job. I'm very proud of that. So I'm sure that will happen, but we do need to see more diversity. The point that Jack makes is right about the social media side. But I have to draw the attention to Boris Johnson and others in Parliament who do not lead by example. And that sort of misogyny is really working against our politics.
Thank you, Matt. And finally, Jack?
No, is the answer. I think the work that needs to happen, I think for me, as a Conservative, I'd never support something like all women shortlists. I think that people should always be chosen on merit. But if you always get effectively the men at the end, then that means at some point along that funnel, there is some kind of problem in terms of, because if talent is equally distributed amongst the genders, so you would expect that the outcome of that to be 50-50, and it's not. So for me, it's all about the funnel system. In the Conservative Party, we have a couple of organisations, one called Women Union, one called the Conservative Youth Organisation. I forget which way round it is, but one of them is encouraging female Conservatives to stand. Their hashtag is Ask Her to Stand, because often we've got an unconscious bias in terms of asking people, and then I think it's Women to Win, and then will help female candidates effectively in higher seats to get elected. So there's a lot more to do, but I would not subscribe to the open shortlist. I'm a Conservative who believes in meritocracy, but I understand that there's fundamental inequalities, meaning that people are getting involved in that.
Thank you, Jack. And we'll have one more general open question before we're then allowing more direct questions to candidates and parties. Yes?
What would you do to improve the public transport system mostly from Leamington to universities?
Jack?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. So I'll give two concrete examples. So the Warwickshire County Council last week, after a lot of lobbying from Jonathan, his Green College and Fairness, but Conservative control, has put in funding for a Leamington to Kenilworth cycle route. So I know people tell me they like to cycle, but who wants to cycle up Kenilworth Road? Frankly, that's obviously not appetizing. I wouldn't do it. So wouldn't ask you to do it. So I think one of the great things we can do is encourage cycling onto campus. And the second, I think we should secondly, I think it's at the left level. I'd like to see a kind of a university train station, so you can get the train straight from Station House to here. I think that'll help everyone because it'll help the traffic, it'll help the green economy, but it'll also help you get here quicker. I think the thing we've got to be concerned about there is cost. And the third, I'd like to electrify our buses. So certainly in the south of town, Jonathan's already mentioned it, there's a massive air pollution issue. Part of that contribution is obviously the chugging away diesel buses, and I'd like to see those go green as soon as possible.
Fabulous, thank you, Jack. Any of the other comments? Jonathan?
Yes, so I think Jack's outlined cycling, trains and buses as the three main areas. I think you have to look at them all. So we're delighted that we're finally going to get the Kenilworth to Leamington, and then we're making sure we're getting the connections through Kenilworth to the Kenilworth campus cycle route. The railway station, I think, is a fantastic idea in theory, and it has gone into the Warwickshire County Council rail strategy. But at the moment they're saying, well, actually it wouldn't deliver enough trains to take any traffic off the A46. And I'm saying, well, why are we doing it if it isn't doing that? So I think we've got to look really carefully at what the most kind of efficient way and to do that is. And I think we might be looking at extending, I think a better idea would be to extend the mass transit system that Coventry are looking at down through from Warwick University through Kenilworth to Leamington. So I think possibly, because of the sheer number of staff and students coming in from Leamington, we need to look at kind of more of a mass transit system rather than a railway station that's probably only going to deliver one or two services an hour.
When I was a student here, we used to have a chap who used to stand for SU president every year on the ticket of a monorail between Leamington and campus. I'm not sure.
Matt?
Thank you. One of the issues that the campus has, of course, is that it's really badly served by stagecoach. And this has been a running story for years. It's a monopoly. I mean, the whole thing about kind of franchising out and privatisation, and he has a very worst example of how privatisation, franchising out, actually works against you, the consumer. So I've campaigned heavily against Stagecoach. About 3 years ago, I was standing at the bus stops every morning, just outside the parish church, and campaigning against Stagecoach because it was such a disservice to you in terms of the fares, but also the replacement fees if you happen to lose your bus pass. So I helped bring about the change to that. One of the issues, of course, is dirty buses. The air quality, when you're standing at that bus stop, and I know it's every morning, it's so bad, and it's because the bus is idle, and it's in the sort of canyoning effect that you get as well. So when Stagecoach actually went to move their depot out of the centre of Leamington, I said, right, what are you going to do then? Presumably you're going to try and put electric in, and a hydrogen tank, because to future-proof the sort of provision that should be made. And they said, no, we can't afford to do that, we're not going to do that. And that's the sort of short-termist thinking that we've gone from a company like Stagecoach. And that's why we want to bring bus services back into public ownership. Caterhill's been mentioned. I raised that in Parliament, you'll be pleased to know. But Leamington Station, we've got to create a proper integrated transport hub so you can get to the university much more easily. And the whole business about putting a station in and also the light rail coming from Coventry as well into the campus. I spoke to ministers, had meetings with ministers about to make sure that's happening. And I think they will be making a dramatic improvement to access to the campus.
Thank you, Matt. And Lewis?
Sure. I think it's fair to say most of the options to improve it have been covered in some way. Generally speaking, I think we need regional investment in transport so that we can relieve the pressures that pinch points like the university traffic get. Ultimately, you look at how the buses are, they're clearly overcrowded. It's not a service that's fit for purpose, and that needs really addressing. But I come back to this local government funding because it's the local governments who are the people who help coordinate these things, help to make sure that they do run smoothly, and they're not being able to do that because of the lack of funding that is coming from central government. So we need to look at how those are funded and then how that gets pushed through. It's lots of councillors who have been working on the Kenilworth to Leamington cycle path. I think diversifying the way that people do travel is great and really important, and that's definitely something I support. But yes, we need to allow these things to be explored at the level that it is happening, which is locally.
Thank you, Lewis. And finally, Tim?
You might recall that I mentioned that in back of my head I remembered some plan about a North Leamington road system. Of course, it's basically where HS2 would be starting at the stone at the end. And of course, one of the reasons that was suggested, was that would help traffic flow around the towns. So it's in effect creating a de facto bypass. So this issue has been around a long time, and I think it's a design issue first of all. I noted today that around after Leamington on the various bridges that there is a automatic number plate recognition system being used as a survey system, so that they can obviously see where vehicles are going. I think we need to really get some good data on what the traffic flows are. Clearly there needs to be a number of ideas looked at, ideas of mass transit, although it mocks the idea of a monorail, perhaps something like that, perhaps we need to be imaginative like that. We need to look at other ideas, and electrification of our vehicle stock would take a long time, however, but yes, we've got to get on with it. This university is heavily involved in battery research, and that is obviously the way to go. Which batteries are lithium polymer, they're not exactly the nicest things to recycle, etc., etc. We need to look at new ideas, but we are heading in the right direction, but these things do take time. Sadly, I suspect most of you will be graduating before anything starts.
Thank you, Tim. Questions from the audience will now be opened up to include candidate and party-specific questions until the end of the hustings. Yes.
So one sort of general question. So it was mentioned about social housing. So there's a dire need for social housing within the constituency, especially when you factor in the appalling number of homeless people that we see on the parade and elsewhere within Leamington. So in the context of the Conservative-led council's efforts of frivolous spending in terms of a new council headquarters, what would the candidates do in terms of trying to get more social housing and cut back on this kind of spending? And also, just a targeted question towards Mr. Rankin as well. You all know that Warwick and Leamington has a large Sikh population. Now, a few days ago, a Conservative candidate who was the MP for Ledlow in Hustings with the Labour candidate who is a Sikh, turban-wearing Sikh, he accused the Labour candidate of talking to his turban. Now, what would the Sikh population of Warwick and Leamington make of that comment and the fact that Conservatives have done nothing about this in terms of disciplinary processes?
Mr. Rankin, if you'd first answer that question and then
I'll answer both of them. That's the first I've heard of that, but if that's how it's reported, that's a disgusting, disgraceful thing to say, and I don't think it should be a Conservative candidate anymore, in my view. So I hope that reassures you on my view on that. On the housing, I absolutely agree. One of the reasons why I wanted to get involved in politics is because there's not enough young people in politics, and that means that when we in Warwick and Leamington, there's a substantial amount of building and development in town. But if you go to a public meeting on it, you'll have lots and lots of angry people telling you it shouldn't happen. And our generation is, largely speaking, underrepresented. So we bought our house, luckily, through a lot of hard work earlier this year. But we've got two good professional incomes coming into the house, and that leaves a lot of people behind. So we need to make sure that the supply is matching demand. In terms of defending the district council's record, over the last 6 years, we've had 8,000, I'm going to get a bit technical, but I think it's important to get into the numbers. We've had 8,205 homes granted planning permission, and 1,486 of those are affordable homes. 3,197 have been granted as affordable homes in planning terms. What's been built in 6 years? 1,486, so that's 38%. Now that Warwick district in sense of affordable homes, that's leading in percentage terms, and that's a three-way split between almost exactly shared ownership, which allows young people to get onto the ladder, affordable rent, which is key working housing, and social rent.
Jack, I'll have to finish
Okay,
off
that's
there.
fine.
Sorry about that. Any of the other candidates answering the question for social housing? Yes, Matt.
Well, I'd like to come back in on the point about whether that person should be standing in Ludlow, or whether they should be withdrawn. And we also have to think about the person standing in Uxbridge, actually. On the social housing side, the affordability is a massive issue across not just Warwick and Leamington, of course, but lots of towns, not just a city issue, social housing. I disagree with the numbers and the reality about what's happening in the building of truly affordable housing. The term affordable, the definition under the government is basically, 80% of average income. And so therefore it is an incorrect figure in terms of calculating what is properly affordable by people in an area. So if you go to Cambridge, for example, it's something like a 14 multiple of income. And people clearly cannot afford that. In Warwick and Leamington, I think it's 8 to 9. What we need to see, and what I've been campaigning for, and it's recognised across the House of Commons by Conservative and Liberal Democrat MPs, is for more affordable council rent, social rent properties. Because without that, it's unsustainable. We need that for our future, for your generation to be able to live somewhere. And just to give you one, if I can just
to wrap up.
10 seconds, if I may. In the last 4 years, only 8 council homes have been built in Warwick and Leamington. That is a pretty damning statistic.
Any of the other candidates to speak to?
Yeah. Basically, we do need more traditional council houses. It's simple. But it's too easy to say. The trouble is, when you start looking at building new traditional council houses, you've got to get the funding from central government, you've also got to find somewhere to put them. Another reason is we've got a problem with land usage. So it's a difficult one. It's not an easy, there is no easy solution. You can stand here as a situation like this and try and think on one's feet. There isn't an easy solution to this at all. But one does need to realise that as the population grows anywhere, question, where would we build 2.4 Londons?
Don't want
It's
to
a planning
finish you
issue,
there.
it's always a planning issue.
Thank you. And Lewis, to speak to the question of the issue of social housing in Leamington.
Yes, I mean, I think Liberal Democrats have a commitment to build I think it's 100,000 social houses across the country in the next 5 years. But actually, I think the heart of the issue isn't just in social housing, it's about making a more sustainable rental market. Ultimately, you look at countries like, say, Germany, where they've got a more sustainable rental market with better controls on that, some parity between rental rates and mortgage rates, and that actually secures a more sustainable housing market as well. That allows people to live happily in rented properties, but also to get onto the ladder when they want. I think the way that we can do that is make sure that there are appropriate controls over private landlords, that we have a help to rent scheme, and also a scheme that allows people into these situations to go from renting to owning property. Because that's the thing, we've got an unsustainable model for how housing is produced. We've got land that's currently being used for agriculture that's being sold off at housing rates. That means that it doesn't matter how many more houses you buy, the prices are always going to go up. You need to make sure you are working in a fair environment, economically speaking, to develop a more sustainable place for people to rent in and then ultimately to buy one.
Thank you, Lewis. Jack, would you like to respond?
Sorry, no.
Or Jonathan, to speak first, and then Jack, feel free to respond.
As you say, there's thousands of people on the council waiting list for a home, and I've worked in a homeless project for 10 years, and the people that you see down the parade that are homeless are the tip of the homelessness iceberg. Hidden homelessness in Warwick and Leamington is a huge problem. And the reason that we haven't had the amount of genuinely social affordable housing, not the definition of the government of affordable housing, which is somewhat bizarre, but actual genuine social housing, is because from 2010 onwards, there were people within Jack's party, I don't think actually Warwick District Council, but people within his party who were ideologically hated, I put it in a strong word, social housing. And so they slashed the social housing budget, I think in half or even in a quarter. And so what happened is that that only left the private market, and so we were beholden to the private market to provide housing, and they just said, yeah, we can provide houses, but you've got to slash the regulations about how we build them. And so that tilted the whole system over. And actually the time in our country's history when we have done social housing the best was post the Second World War. We had a really good mix of social government building housing and the private sector, and they balanced each other because neither sector was able to kind of run off in one direction, and that's where we need to get back to.
Brilliant, thank you. Sorry, firstly, we have Jack speaking to...
We're all on the same page here, but some numbers here that just aren't true, frankly. So in the last 6 years, 536 houses have been built at social rent levels. So not affordable housing, at social rent levels in Warwick District, so 536. Since May, the new administration has bought 51 homes, so not new homes, existing homes, it's bought 51, of which 28, over 50%, will be rented at social rent levels. So to say Warwick District Council is doing nothing about this is just factually inaccurate. No, you didn't, but Matt did. And the council has also bought the office block, so I don't know if you guys will know it, at 1 Warwick Street, so above Quick Fit, next to Star and Garter, and that's going to be converted entirely to 1-bedroom flats, which is where we've got the most acute need, and they'll all be at social rent levels. So, I believe that as a society we have a moral duty, individually and collectively, to try to deal with this challenge, but I would strongly defend Warwick District Council.
But Jonathan's point is right, that there was no appetite to build these properties. And the questioner was asking about the council offices project. So the council was looking to sell its own offices for private housing development, exclusively the private housing development. So it's its own authority with the responsibility of housing. It was not even going to provide any affordable or social rent properties. It is totally inexcusable for them to even be doing that. The figure of the 500 that Jack quoted in the context of the thousands of homes that are being built in South Warwick and Leamington, it is a very, very small percentage. It is not what is needed in our society. As Jonathan was saying, you look up and down the street, we have the highest incidence, the number of rough sleepers per thousand in the whole of the West Midlands. That is a damning statistic that we should all be concerned about.
Any final comments to the social housing question?
Well,
Tim, did you want to say
I just
something?
want to say, so we don't forget that obviously after World War II, there was a lot more smaller population, a lot more land. So obviously we were able to see some very, very good social housing. We also saw some rubbish as well, the old tower blocks and so forth. And despite recent history, we're going to start putting more and more social housing into restricted spaces. We might have to revisit the tower block concept, but obviously with a slightly better safety record than recent.
Mr. Griffiths, I think you're forgetting who came over to this country to build those houses after the Second World War, so I'll be
I'm not. I think you presume too much.
No, this country's built on immigration, so the fact that you want to cut it down is two manageable levels.
Well,
Sorry, Tim, can I just end that question there? Can we ask the audience for a second question? Yeah.
I have a question for Matt Weston, the Labour candidate. You talk passionately about the diversity, sadly indeed, of your party. What about the female Jewish MPs who have been hounded out amid the institutional anti-Semitism in your party and the party they once called home? And more broadly, how can you stand for a party of whom 85% of British Jews view the leader as an anti-Semite? And how can you stand for a party of whom, if elected to government, nearly 50% of British Jews have said they will consider emigrating from this country? Are you proud to turn your back on the Jewish community?
Well, thank you for the question. It's, I think what has happened, the party, and I was elected 2.5 years ago, so I'm very new to the Parliamentary Labour Party.
You're aware.
It works. The reality is that I am seriously disappointed by how slowly the party has acted to that. It needed a much swifter, bolder, more robust response, and that did not happen. So people like Ruth Smith, Luciana Berger, I would consider colleagues and friends. And I saw some of the tweets. Now, some of the stuff that came out, it was difficult to establish was just how much from Labour Party members or Labour Party affiliates or whatever. But I do think that the party should have acted far more quickly, and I think that's disappointing. I mean, on a personal level, I absolutely do not believe in a lot of people in the Jewish community, and I think there's obviously diverse communities within the Jewish community, there's not one. But a lot of Jewish friends say that the party is, I do not believe it's anti-Semitic, institutionally anti-Semitic as you suggest. There are, as in all organisations, there are elements who would be anti-Semitic or racist.
Matt, can I ask you to wrap up on this question?
I absolutely abhor that. John Bercow has described Jeremy Corbyn as not anti-Semitic.
What about the 85% of British Jews who view him as anti-Semitic?
Well, my wife is a Jew, and I'm of Jewish descent, and many friends, and they would not describe the Labour Party.
No, 85% of British Jews have said they think Jeremy Corbyn is an anti-Semite. It's not just
I haven't seen that statistic.
It's been all over the news. I simply don't believe that.
I'd be interested to have a conversation after and to look at the research that you've got, or you can share that with me. But it's not something I'm familiar with. But my wife, her great-grandparents were killed in the Holocaust. It is something that I am absolutely horrified by, is that there could be anti-Semitism within the party. If I believe that has to be the case, I would leave the party.
Johnny?
A question from Twitter to Jack Rankin. How would you help further equality for the LGBT community when the PM refers to gay men as bumboys in tank tops?
So I don't agree with those comments. I don't think you should say anything like that. What I would say is, and I think this is important, in fairness to the other parties on the panel, they attended Warwick Pride, which is in the Pumpkin Gardens for many years. I took the Conservatives in Warwick and Leamington to Warwick Pride for the first time this year. I think it's important to give the message that my party has not got a record to be admired over the last decade or so on this issue. I think it's important to be clear that we as a party have changed, that we as a party distance ourselves from too much of an enjoyable experience for me, but I think it was important that we were there to show we change. I think we can demonstrate that in our public policy going forward. I think by the Conservatives legalising gay marriage, that's a big first step to say as a party that we can move on to this.
Thank you, Jack. And questions for any of the other three candidates?
So can I just come in there?
Yeah.
It was the coalition government that delivered legal gay marriage, and the Liberal Democrats within the coalition government that saw that delivered. And that's yet another aspect of Conservatives claiming something for their own. I think it's all well and good that you are engaging on this topic, and I think it's respectable that you did it and tried yourself. But the comment was about your leader, and he's still the leader, and that's where we're now looking at aspect of the party is, and it's got to be every aspect of the party that respects these different communities, people from different backgrounds, no matter who they are and how they identify, and I think that's fundamental.
Thank you, Lewis. Other questions?
Yeah, given the recent issues with Prince Andrew, do you think the royal family needs any reform?
Candidates to speak first. Jonathan?
Yes. So I would definitely be in favour of a much slimmed down royal family along more the lines of a European style monarchy. I don't think it's acceptable that there's the royal family and the monarchy still own huge swathes of the land in our country. I don't think that's equitable or fair. I am though a monarchist. I don't believe that we should get rid of the monarchy entirely. Because I think actually a constitutional monarch with power in Parliament, I'm quite happy about the system. We've got enough else on our plates at the moment, but certainly I would like to see substantial reform.
Thank you, Jonathan. And Tim?
It's a difficult one, that, isn't it? It really is, because a lot of people love the concept of the monarchy. But I think we probably in an audience like this, I think most of us realise that the constitutional monarchy is a structure to allow us to head a state that actually has no power, might have lots of influence, but has no power. And the concept actually, if you look at the graph in Alex Salmon, is the man's book, works out the different power ratios, and if I remember rightly, everything really in this country in terms of power is centred around the office of the Prime Minister. So the monarchy as a structure obviously depends on respect for the people for it to survive, and Prince Andrew is not helping that. As to what the future monarchy is, I think the thing to do is let this play out and see what they do to themselves or do or whatever, because I think they've got to do something about it internally as an organisation.
I would just echo really Jonathan's point. I think we do need to reduce it down. The number of people on the civil list is just ridiculous. And the police protection costs associated with that, it is way too expensive, and they really are a bit ephemeral, if I may say. I think that Prince Andrew should face a visa. I think he should go to the US and go through the court system. Because who knows what happened, but it doesn't look good, and it's really important for the monarchy that Patrick does go over and face the figures there. I think that just as an aside, they had a referendum in Belgium post the Second World War on whether they should reinstate the monarchy in exile. I think it was King Leopold or something. They had this referendum in 1945. They're still arguing about the result of it.
And Jack?
Well, I don't think it surprises you to hear that a Conservative candidate. I'm a unionist and a monarchist and a loyalist. And I love the Queen. Do I love Prince Andrew? I think the answer is no. I think, to be honest, he has brought himself and his family into disrepute. I don't think he should be treated any differently more than any other private citizen. And I think Jonathan and Matt actually make good points in that when Prince Andrew was, I suppose, second son, there was a role for him in public life. When it's kind of cascading down the generations, I think it would be very wise, both as a PR exercise, frankly, for the monarchy, but also in terms of, public spending and in terms of good governance, to kind of probably slim that down now to the heirs of Charles. Prince Andrew
And Lewis, would you like to speak to the question?
Yeah, thanks. I was asked, I think, during the royal wedding, are you a monarchist? And I didn't expect the question at all. It came out of the blue because I've never really identified to the monarchy itself. I think I've learned more from the crown than anything else about what it is. I think there is inherent value in it. I think the crown's a testament to that. We are interested, we're fascinated in it. People coming to this country from outside are fascinated in it. And I think that is a good thing. But no, we have to make sure that it has a purpose and that it is cost effective. Because the amount of money that does go to the Crown Estate is disproportionate to what we're seeing as in terms of benefit, especially when there are people in this country who, as we've already spoke about, are homeless. These are things that need to go and be addressed so that the inequality in our society can really be addressed, and we're not squabbling about whether we've got a monarchy.
Thank you, Lewis. And another question from the audience, please. Stevie?
With the NHS on its knees, what are all of your policies toward making sure that healthcare is well provided in Warwickshire, Warwick and Leamington?
And the candidates to speak about healthcare in Warwickshire and
Yeah, I'm happy to try to field that. So locally in Warwick and Leamington, we have an outstanding NHS. Our South Warwickshire NHS Foundation Trust is one of the kind of leading stars of NHS Foundation Trust, and it's one that a lot look to copy best practice, and we're very proud of it. But generally speaking, the NHS frankly needs more funding. Why does it need more funding? Because of our ageing demographics, and largely we've got something like 28% increase in A&E at Warwick Hospital this year based on last year. And what's most concerning is the acuity of those patients, by which I mean the frailty of the people who are turning up at A&E, which is making obviously the system much more constrained. So we're going to have to systematically invest in the National Health Service that recognises some of those demographic pressures. We've pledged £33.9 billion extra to the NHS by 2023. I think that's a start, but there's more to do.
And any further candidates to speak to the NHS? Lewis, and then we'll have Tim.
Sure, thanks very much. I think the funding crisis is something that absolutely needs to be addressed. The Democrats are repeating our pledge to put a penny on the pound on income tax, so that that's ring-fenced and that's something that we can invest without taking from somewhere else. Ultimately, we need to also look at how our health services are delivered best. I mean, I've spoken to people from across the NHS so that I can get a good picture of how this can be done, because ultimately we need to talk to people in this profession to learn how to do it. They are the people who know best, and ultimately it's a local approach that needs to happen. It's about well-being, so that people don't necessarily need to go to the GP, or they don't need to go to the A&E. It's about providing long-term care to help alleviate these pressures. I think something that absolutely needs to be addressed is mental health. It needs parity with physical health. We need to make sure this is addressed at every level, and that the investment's there for that, and the actual services are there for that. I've got experience of this myself, and they mean well, but they did not have the resources available to them. So those are the things fundamental. It's a local organisation and focusing on those services that are needed.
And Tim, to speak to the question about the NHS.
Firstly, I want to say there is never going to be any NHS privatisation under the Brexit Party. That is the key point. We are not pro-privatisation of the NHS. Keep it state-owned. Obviously, there is interaction between the state-owned sector and the private sector. Go into long discussions about that. But the point is, it is fundamentally always in the Brexit Party to be a state-owned service. We believe that yes, there has to be far more funding across the whole service at every level. We also need to see better efficiencies. We need to see better management, but more medical staff. Sometimes you see more managers than NHS staff. We need to increase the staff levels. We need to see doctors, nurses, etc., etc. It's not just an easy task. We've had a long period of just messed up ideas. It's not just like investment. There's all sorts of things like going along issues about my personal experience of using NHS. Where my father's carer for as the professionals.
And Matt, the NHS in Warwick and Leamington.
It's a good question. The NHS is so important to us. But we have very good delivery services. The Warwick Hospital is terrific. The Foundation Trust is excellent in South Florida. But we see GP numbers falling. We've seen across the board, across the UK, 100,000 staff shortages, 43,000 nurses shortfall currently in the NHS. We've lost 15,000 beds since 2010. These are really stark statistics, but they're true. What Labour will promise is to put £40 billion cash equivalent into the NHS. That equates to the 53.6 the Conservatives are proposing. You may have heard the statistic from the Conservatives about was it 50,000 nurses, but new ones, but actually 18,000 already exist within the NHS. I'm not quite sure any of the statistics or the numbers are coming up with the Conservative Party about their real commitment to it. The real concern for us has to be that it is the most efficient health service in the world. That's recognised by the OECD. We're spending about 7% of GDP for our health sector, and it's about 11% in Germany. But it still delivers. The truth is that we have very long waiting lists. We have a huge crisis in adult social care, which is putting a huge burden actually onto the existing provision. My stepson actually works at Warwick Hospital, and the reality is that there is...
Matt, can I ask you to wrap up, please?
Certainly. There's a real issue about beds in corridors because there just isn't the capacity currently to deal with that. That's why we must invest in it and we work on our social transformation plan.
And Jonathan?
Yeah, so there is a funding gap. I think we've kind of all agreed that. But one of the key things is the local authorities, the councils and the NHS just are not working well enough together on adult social care for older people. There's a big culture clash there, and the NHS kind of trying to hold on to it a little bit too much. So there's that one. The prevention thing is really important. Part of the reason so many people end up in A&E is because they don't have access to walk-in centres or easy GP appointments. And so we need to really invest in that kind of earlier prevention, and that will save money later on. Mental health services have been touched on, and we've been talking about this for a few years about parity, and to be honest, the mental health services that I see in Warwick and Leamington for both children, young people and adults are a disgrace. People are waiting months for the services, for the help they need. They basically, and I'm not exaggerating here, people literally have to be saying, I'm about to commit suicide before getting emergency help. And the pressure and the pain that puts on individuals and their families is immense, and it's completely unwarranted and unnecessary. And whoever gets into government after December the 12th must address our mental health services as a priority.
Thank you, Jonathan. And we'll have 2 more questions from the audience. Lois?
Just a question for Matt. If Labour were to win the next general election, how much freedom in the party would Jeremy Corbyn have to implement his own personal beliefs?
How much freedom would we have? That's a very interesting question. I hope no one's recording this. Thank you. Hello. I'm sure he will... the party is democratic, and the great thing about Jeremy Corbyn is that he has reset the politics, I think, in this country. And he has recognised that we need a new sort of socialism within this country that is going to restore the sort of things that we enjoyed back in the 1970s that I was describing, about free education, about universal health care, and so on. Council housing that we used to have up until 1979, and we enjoyed as a great benefit post-war years. So I think, to answer the question specifically, he is leading us, he's taken us on a path to a transformation, not just of our social, of our society, but recognises the absolute priority, which is the climate emergency. And that's why we propose £250 billion in what we describe as the Green Transformation Fund to reset the UK economy. So yes, he's got some great ideas, and I think he'll have a degree of freedom.
Thank you, Matt. And one more question from the audience. Lucy?
So if you were to get into government, how would you champion access to medicines? And I mean that both in the UK and globally. The pharmaceutical system at the moment has been described as broken, so it will either set prices too high, so people
medicines too?
It would appear that obviously a wider world marketplace access would make prices go down. And that's basically one of the things we want about. We open up our ability to purchase medicines from a wider pool of resources. We should be able to encourage competition and bring prices down. And it's not just America, there's other places in America, right? So, there's the pharmaceutical industry in Australia, Japan, etc., India. There's so many opportunities to reduce costs and from importing from around the world. And that's what we should be looking at.
Jack?
To be honest, I don't know much about the topic, so I'm not sure I have a particularly good answer for you, but I'm very happy to talk afterwards so you can teach me more. I think generally the principle, there's a balance, isn't there? You can give people as much IP and data protection in the world, so they'll invest lots of money, but then it becomes too expensive. Or you can not give them protection and no one's going to be R&D, but the drugs that are available might be cheap. I would obviously, as a conservative, state the obvious somewhat, prefer that understand that the R&D funds are only ever going to come from the dynamic market economy. So I would want to kind of stay at intellectual protection, but it's got to work obviously for our NHS and consumers. So I've given you there a pretty principle-based answer, but I've got to say I don't know too much about how the pharma industry interacts with national health.
So I was sitting on the International Trade Select Committee for 2 years, which gave a real insight into what might happen. It's quite interesting looking back about 2002 and US trade with Australia and what happened there in terms of pricing on medicines, reference pricing on medicines into the Australian healthcare system. The real concern for us should be that US pharma, big pharma, actually wants to drive prices up because they believe that they get to a lower price in the US market and they want to push up prices elsewhere to compensate for what they perceive to be too low prices in the US. They're actually quite high in the US as that happens. So the real concern with Brexit is that Trump and Big Pharma want to, there are two things that they want out of the NHS. Data. That's the absolute number one priority. They want all our data because we have this fantastic universal system that has access to 60 million records and more. And that is what they're after. The second thing is about access to the NHS, driving up prices of medicines, and that is the number one thing for them, along with food and agricultural products, because of the massive influence of the agricultural sector.
And Jonathan, just read the question of accessibility of medicines.
Yeah, really good question. I think within the UK, the NICE organisation that we have at the moment, the NICE board, actually have been seen to do quite a good job of managing prices better than some other parts of the world, certainly as Matt says in the States. I think it's an interesting question because lots of people kind of think of science and R&D as a really neutral thing, and it's just kind of where the exploration takes us, whereas I think pharma's a really good example of where that proves that is not the case. That as a society, we can decide where we want to invest R&D, and I think it's shocking that we kind of maybe choose to invest in, as a society, in pharmaceutical solutions for the rich West, rather than looking at some of the solutions, the pharmaceutical solutions we need in the developing world, which would have a massive impact on billions of people, but get a tiny amount of R&D at the moment. And so what I think I'd be looking to do is how could we incentivize those larger pharmaceutical companies to direct the R&D into some of those developing world diseases, issues, and you can do that through a mixture of kind of funding, incentives, and also legislative incentives. So I'd look to kind of use the levers that government have to try and direct that expertise to help as many people in the developing world as possible.
Would you like to speak to that briefly?
I was just going to say that there's something that I'm thinking about in general. I mean, one important point about the university system is that in terms of blue sky research into antibiotics and so forth, we need to get that done in the university system where the IP is controlled within a academic environment before it takes it into a commercial situation. That's what's so important about universities, because it's not just because antibiotics. I was reading something about it. There's another stream of biological agent that can be used. Could you pay? Anyway,
Penicillin?
no. There's some. Sorry, I can't remember the word. But there was when antibiotics were discovered and developed, this area of research went down. But there is so many opportunities should be so many opportunities. We should be looking for, to be sending out the young scientists of the world looking for alternative antibiotics.
And Lewis, would you just finally like to speak to the issue of accessibility of pharmaceuticals in the UK?
Yes, absolutely. I think fundamentally our position is there's a great market within the EU, and that's something we want to keep as open to as possible. There's a reason that people are stockpiling these things and are worried about this, and I think that's something that's probably speaking to the economics behind this. But I also think there's also an excellent development and research aspect of the domestically within our own universities, within our own hospitals, and it's about strengthening that as well, so that we've got something to give and we've got something that we can reflect and share with other people. Because ultimately, it's about sharing that knowledge, sharing that skills base, and allowing that to help the global economics and the local economics.
Thank you, Lewis. And now, just before the closing statements, I'd just like to ask one sort of final question, just for brief answers, please. Which issue do you think is more important in this election, Brexit or the climate crisis? Jonathan, speak first.
Well, that leads me kind of nicely back. No point. So, as I said right at the beginning, to me, it's the climate crisis is going to have the biggest impact on all our lives, and that is coming whether we like it or not, and whether we choose to prepare it or not. And I think our role as politicians and our role as government is to try and make that transition that we've got to make as smooth as possible, and with the investment up front as early as possible, because if we fail to do that, it's always the least well off and the most vulnerable in our society that take the largest burden. So we've got a responsibility, both environmentally and kind of socially, to make sure that we act sensibly and urgently to tackle the climate crisis. And to me, that's all going to be more important than the outcome of Brexit.
Thank you, Jonathan. And any of the other candidates speaking next? Lewis?
Sure. Ultimately, I think the biggest issue that we as a species are facing today is the climate emergency. I think Brexit's actually not helping us address that, because we've got great ties working together with the EU, and our economy is going to, it's been taking a hit already, which is, we need the money to be able to invest in these solutions to make addressing the climate emergency front and centre. As far as Liberal Democrats go, it's in every aspect of our manifesto, addressing this and making sure we've got zero carbon targets, from economics to housing to transport, and that's what we need to do. We need to look at this in terms of every aspect of society, not just an isolated one.
Thank you, Lewis. And Jack?
I won't answer the question straightforwardly. The reason we're having this election, the reason I'm standing, is because this Parliament's fundamentally broken and has reached a point of paralysis. So it's not Brexit or, it's Brexit to do other things. Until we get Brexit done, frankly, we're not going to move on to all those other priorities. Climate crisis should be absolutely towards the top of that agenda. But the only way we will do that is if we get the Conservative majority government, we open the deal, and we can all move on with our lives, frankly.
Thank you, Jack. And Matt?
Well, the climate crisis is the global issue, and so therefore it has one of the biggest issues that we all face collectively. I mean, the fact that in Madrid we have COP, forget the number, 25 taking place at the moment, and the fact that the United States has walked away from sort of negotiation really should be concerning an alarm to all of us. Twice in Parliament I called for a debate on climate emergency, and twice I'm afraid it was refused. But Labour did push ahead, and we did actually get the Parliament to declare a climate emergency. Back in 2008, the UK was the first country in the world to have a climate change act, so I'm very proud of the fact we showed leadership on that. It is something we need to address urgently, and that's why we are saying we want to reset the economy with this £250 billion transformation fund to reset the economy, change our energy base, and to urgently address this, because people talk about 1, 2, 3 degree temperature change in the abstract. The reality, when you look at the science, is that it is dramatic, the impact it will have on to all parts of the world, not just the low-lying coral islands and so on. You realise that sort of 4 degrees, London is underwater. So we have to address that. Brexit, of course, is critical, but for our own politics, and we will address that, as I said, we'll address that within 6 months.
Thank you, Matt. And finally, Tim, Brexit or the climate change?
I actually feel Brexit is a very important issue, but I don't say that what we're calling, most people are calling the climate crisis, is not a low-ranking issue either. It's a very important issue. But I'd like to rephrase it as the energy crisis, because one of the issues we've got here is we've developed a culture, an industrial base, a lifestyle based on the consumption of energy. The thing is, be very aware of what you wish for, because you're sitting there, your phone's tapping away here, your equipment is all made of plastics, and the amount of hydrocarbons that are littered amongst us, the carpet, everything. The hydrocarbon economy is extremely important to everything we do, even if we're not burning it. We need the hydrogen. We need to realise what a wonderful resource hydrocarbons are. So, yes, it's not burning, it's quite frankly burning is a waste. But don't be surprised if it takes a lot longer to sort out an energy crisis, climate crisis issue than it does Brexit. Brexit needs to be done. It's basically a regional political issue. So once we've got it sorted, however we want it sorted, I'd like to see it sorted the way we'd like to see it, but the energy issue will continue, and it's not just about hydrocarbons. We've got to start looking at alternative ways of reducing our energy resources. We've got to look at the battery technologies, etc., etc. These are sound things that should be really at the heart of our universities, STEM, art, research, and so forth.
Thank you, Tim. And now if I can ask you all for your closing statements, starting with Lewis, please, and we'll work with everyone along.
Sure, thank you very much. Thank you for having us this evening. I make sure whenever I talk to people and on something that I listen to their views. So having the questions that you've asked are very insightful. It's definitely going to enlighten me and the policies that I stand by. Ultimately, what I stand by and the Liberal Democrats stand by is a fairer society, one that works for everybody. I think this can be delivered through electoral reform. I think it can be delivered by investment in the things that matter to people, into the services that affect people on a personal level. And these are the things that I want to see as the MP for Warwick and Leamington, so that representation for you, for everybody in this area can really be felt and be carried forward. So thank you again very much.
Thank you, Lewis and Matt, for your presentation.
Brilliant, thank you. Thanks to Polsock for holding this event and for it being so well attended. Thanks for coming along. I believe that we have this once-in-a-generation opportunity to transform this country in a way that we did post the Second World War, when we had a very progressive Labour government under Clem Attlee, and that is what we should be imagining, the vision that Clem Attlee had with his government. That's what we should be looking to deliver now, because we need it if we're going to tackle the climate emergency, but also the banking crisis that in 2008 almost brought us down. These need permanently addressing. I don't believe they were in the aftermath of that crisis. We need to invest in our public services and to talk about the NHS. But critically, I view this as the lost decade, and you as a generation who've missed out. And that's why I want to see us invest in education. I want to see us invest in low-cost housing, the council housing that I was describing, but to make sure that you are able to prosper in this new economy that I described. This green transformation fund will absolutely reset this country and show leadership in the way Labour did back in 2008.
Thank you, Matt. And Jonathan, your closing statement?
Yes, thank you for having us. Thank you for the questions, and thanks for Colstock for organising. It's been a pleasure. People often, as you can imagine, say to me, Jonathan, why should I vote Green when there's all these other parties around? Why should I do it? And the answer I give is from the experience that I've seen as a local politician in recent years, that every time somebody votes Green, every extra Green vote, every extra Green councillor, every extra Green voice in the room getting in those debates makes a huge impact on all the other parties. To be honest, the Conservatives especially, and to some extent the other parties, just don't grasp the sheer scale of the challenge that the climate crisis that we face ahead of us. And by voting Green, you tell those other parties, you drag them forward to say that you have to deal with it. Because believe me, other parties, that they look at all the minutiae of who people vote for. So even if it's only a very small increase, they're like, we've got to do something different because otherwise we're going to lose more of our vote. And then having that Green voice in the room at council and hopefully now at parliamentary level, it is transformative in terms of the policies that we see put forward. So I'd say vote Green on December the 12th.
Thank you, Jonathan. Now, Jack, your closing statement?
Yes, thank you. Thank you to Paul Sock and thank you to you lot for not heckling me. I want to get politics off our telly. That sounds a bit of a funny one, but it's on our telly every night. Well, maybe you don't consume the news like us middle-aged folks do. And that's dysfunctional. Parliament's been talking to itself on repeat, arguing amongst itself for 3.5 years. All the questions you've asked about me on mental health, on drugs, on the NHS, on crime, school funding, they're your priorities, and Parliament is completely failing because it is paralysed. My view is that at this election we're going to have two outcomes. We're either going to have a Conservative majority government, which will get Brexit done, and start to work on those priorities, or we're going to have a minority Corbyn-led government, which is going to be propped up by the SNP and the Liberals, who are going to want a referendum each. And so 2020 is going to be a year of, frankly, a manifesto which is a recipe for bankruptcy, and a lot more constitutional navel-gazing. I don't think that's in the interest of this country. I don't think it's in the interest of you as young people. I don't think it's in the interest of local members.
Thank you, Jack McFarlane, your closing statement.
Well, thank you, guys, for having me here, and thank you for being welcoming. I would like to see, what would I like to see? I'd like to see no vote. A lot of the people that voted for leaving the EU are very disappointed with those that are fighting to stop it. And we want the situation to come to a close. We want to see our vote honoured. That's what we want. It's nothing big. We are asked to vote for something, and we want it honoured. What more can we do about it? And then we move forward. Then we start looking at how to reform our politics, how to reform the way this nation. And there is a massive agenda there, and I think a little bit too much for a little closing statement behind this statement. I think it's a long, drawn-out subject which will take many years, but I hope that we can all engage with it. I hope that we can get a nation that we can be proud of, move forward for all our benefits. We need to have good social services, but we also need to have great business opportunities for everybody. We need to do both. We need to be able to spend the money, we need to be able to earn the money. So we need to be a creative, vibrant nation that uses our young folk themselves to make it happen. Okay?
Thank you, Tim. And Lucy, would you like to close the for us?
I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming tonight. Thank you for taking the time to come and listen to these candidates. I'm sure you will agree with me saying it's been a thorough and sober evening here at Real to say. I'd like you to just join me in saying the round of applause for the more as an executive will be involved in organising the event, but I'd also like a round of applause for our chair, Bradley Kenner. thank you all for coming. And I just want to say on behalf of PolSoc, at the core of what we believe in as a society, continue to be aware of the political climate, continue to scrutinize MPs and candidates like you have done tonight, and continue to be a part of politics and the discussion in this country. That's what we stand for as a society, and that's what you guys have done here tonight at the Hustings. So I just want to thank you for that, and I urge you to use your right to vote, whether it be in this constituency or whether it be in your home constituency. Use that right and be a part of the politics of this country. So thank you again for coming, and we have a very interesting couple of weeks ahead of us.